Somebody on a podcast just asked the most dangerous question in hip-hop right now. You think 50 Cent is gonna respond? And watch what happens at that table. Silence. Nervous laughter. Everybody looking at everybody else, because everybody in that room already knew the answer. 50 Cent didn't respond. 50 Cent declared war. And what 50 Cent did next wasn't a diss track, wasn't a freestyle, wasn't some emotional late-night rant. 50 Cent posted a picture of a rat, typed 4 words, "I think I'm Big Meech," and detonated 20 years of history in a single upload. Stay with me, because by the end of this breakdown, every piece connects. The tell-all documentary, the wiretap affidavits, the Charleston White clip, the Rick Ross link-up, and a television show 50 Cent announced with a title so disrespectful it should be studied in a courtroom. This is not a beef. This is an execution with a marketing budget. Now let's rewind, because the people asking, "Will 50 Cent respond?" don't understand what they're actually watching. The conversation that started all of this wasn't even about Big Meech at first. The panel was talking about Dave Blunt's, about whether new artists are getting $50 million, $200 million deals, about whether the money in rap is even real anymore. And somebody at the table shut the whole thing down with one sentence. These dudes ain't getting $200 million deals like Meech, like Lil Meech, like Ross, like Dave Blunt's. 50 Cent is on a whole other level. Read that again. Even in a conversation 50 Cent wasn't part of, 50 Cent's name became the measuring stick. That's the first thing you need to understand about Curtis Jackson. 50 Cent doesn't enter conversations. Conversations orbit 50 Cent. And that's exactly why what Big Meech did next was so confusing to everybody watching. Because here's the setup. Demetrius Flannery, Big Meech, the co-founder of Black Mafia Family, a name that used to make entire neighborhoods go quiet, comes home after nearly 2 decades behind federal walls. 19 years. Let that number sit in your chest for a second. 19 years of birthdays missed, of funerals attended through a phone call, of watching the culture change through a television bolted to a wall. And when Meech finally walks out, the streets are waiting to see one thing. What does a legend do with a second life? The whole industry held its breath. And the first major move the world saw? Big Meech standing next to Rick Ross. Posing. Smiling. Doing promo. Now, if you're new to this, you might shrug. A photo with Rick Ross. So what? But if you know the map, if you know the territory, your jaw hit the floor. Because Rick Ross and 50 Cent aren't just 2 rappers who traded insults. 50 Cent and Rick Ross have one of the longest, coldest, most personal wars in the history of the genre. Court cases, mock funerals, baby mother shopping sprees. 15+ years of psychological warfare where 50 Cent treated Rick Ross like a recurring character in a sitcom 50 Cent wrote, directed, and syndicated. There is no neutral ground when Rick Ross is involved. Everybody in the culture knows this. And Big Meech, a man whose entire mythology is built on reading rooms, reading people, reading danger before danger even knows it's coming, Big Meech knows this better than anybody. So the question the whole internet started asking was simple. Why would Big Meech, fresh home, with every door in America open, walk through the one door guaranteed to put a target on Meech's own back? Hold that thought. We're coming back to it, because the answer is darker than you think. First, you need to understand how 50 Cent fights. Most rappers beef with bars. Most rappers get emotional, get in the booth, vent for 3 minutes, and call it a response. 50 Cent has never once fought like that. Not once. 50 Cent fights like a prosecutor. 50 Cent collects. 50 Cent waits. 50 Cent lets the target get comfortable, lets the target talk, lets the target pose for pictures, and then, when the timing inflicts maximum damage, 50 Cent reaches into a folder the target forgot existed. And this time, the folder had a name on it. Tammy Cowins. Here's where the story goes from beat to something else entirely. Because 50 Cent didn't just call Big Meech names. 50 Cent announced that 50 Cent was backing a tell-all documentary, fronted by Tammy Cowins, a woman from inside the BMF orbit, a woman whose name appears in places that make defense attorneys sweat. The claim 50 Cent put into the atmosphere was surgical. The biggest mistake Meech ever made wasn't the case, wasn't the conviction, wasn't the 19 years. The biggest mistake was not sustaining the relationship with Tammy Cowins. Because now Tammy Cowins was about to talk. And what Tammy Cowins was allegedly talking about wasn't street gossip. It was paperwork. Affidavits. The affidavit in support of the wiretaps. 3 of them, according to the chatter, documents that people online claim lay out Meech's full role in ways the public never heard at trial. Now, and this matters, so listen carefully, allegations are not verdicts. Paperwork floating around the internet is not a court ruling, and everybody in this story deserves that much fairness. But understand something about the streets and about the internet. Neither one waits for a judge. The moment the word paperwork entered the chat, the conversation stopped being about music. It became about the one accusation no street legend can survive unanswered. And 50 Cent knew that. 50 Cent has always known that. Now let's talk about the clip that set the comment sections on fire. Charleston White. And whether the audience loves Charleston White or can't stand Charleston White, Charleston White says the quiet part with a bullhorn. Charleston White looked dead into a camera and delivered the verdict that went viral. Big Meech is a rapper now, not a dealer. Rapper. Not a dealer. 6 words that rewrote a 20-year legend in a single interview. And here's the part that should chill anybody who understands how this game works. Instead of outrage, instead of the streets rising up to defend the name, a strange number of people nodded. Because the whispers about paperwork had already done the damage before Charleston White ever opened Charleston White's mouth. That's the sequence most people missed. The paperwork rumor didn't follow the disrespect. The paperwork rumor authorized the disrespect. And then came the St. Louis moment. A podcast table, a local legend nicknamed Coffee sitting right there, and the host bringing up the paperwork situation from the last interview. Listen to what the host says next, because this is the temperature of the streets in real time. A lot of people had a lot to say, and a lot of people flat out didn't believe it. Didn't believe the paperwork existed. Didn't believe the affidavits were real. Didn't believe a name like Meech could ever be standing next to a word like cooperation. And that disbelief, that refusal, is exactly the fuel 50 Cent poured on the fire. Because 50 Cent understands something most people never learn. The accusation doesn't need to be proven to work. The accusation only needs to be loud enough that the defense sounds desperate. Watch the genius of the actual post one more time. A picture of a rat. 4 words. I think I'm Big Meech. No names in the caption. No explanation. No follow-up rant. That's not an insult, that's a riddle. 50 Cent made the entire internet solve the riddle, and every single person who solved the riddle did 50 Cent's promotion for free. The blogs wrote the articles. The podcasts booked the emergency episodes. The comment sections held trials. And 50 Cent? 50 Cent was already on to the next chess move, announcing a television show with a title that doubles as a warning label. 50 Ways to Catch a Killer. Read that title again. In the middle of a paperwork war, 50 Cent announced a show about catching people. That's not a coincidence. That's a man narrating the destruction in real time and charging the audience admission. Now, to be fair, and this breakdown stays fair, there is another side of the table, and the other side made a point worth hearing. One of the voices in that original conversation said it plain. There's so much money on the table, and they always say you can't argue with yourself, so sometimes you have to let them just talk. Let them talk. That's the counter strategy. That's the argument that Meech engaging 50 Cent would be Meech stepping down a weight class, because street legends don't win internet wars. Internet wars are won by people with nothing to lose and Wi-Fi. And the same voice said the quiet truth out loud. 50 Cent is bullying Meech because Meech ain't no internet dude, and 50 Cent is absolutely an internet dude. One thing the voice claimed to know about street dudes ain't gonna play with that title. Meaning the accusation itself, the rat imagery, the paperwork whispers, is the kind of line that doesn't stay online forever. Meaning this war has a ceiling, and above that ceiling, nobody controls what happens next. But here's where this story stops being gossip and starts being a case study, because almost everybody covering this war is asking the wrong question. Everybody keeps asking, why did 50 Cent flip on Meech? Wrong question. The real question, the question that unlocks the whole board, is this: what did 50 Cent build that Meech walked away from? Think about it. Who turned the Black Mafia family from a cautionary tale into premium television? Who cast Meech's own son, Demetrius Flannery Jr., Lil Meech, as the face of the story, and put that young man in acting classes, on press runs, on red carpets? Who spent years and millions of dollars converting the Flannery name from a federal case file into an entertainment franchise? 50 Cent. All of that was 50 Cent. While Meech sat behind those walls, 50 Cent was the one keeping the mythology alive, keeping the lights on, keeping the family name in the culture's mouth. From 50 Cent's chair, and you don't have to like the man to understand the math, 50 Cent wasn't a friend of the family. 50 Cent was the bank. So when Meech came home, and the first viral image was Meech grinning next to Rick Ross, the one man 50 Cent has spent 15 years humiliating, 50 Cent didn't see a photo op. 50 Cent saw an unpaid invoice. 50 Cent saw a franchise the man built with one hand being used as a welcome home gift for the man's enemy. That's the lens. That's the whole war in one frame. This was never about a rat emoji. The rat emoji was the receipt. And once the war is seen through that lens, every move since makes perfect sense. The documentary isn't revenge content. The documentary is a hostile takeover of the narrative. For years, 50 Cent owned the official BMF story on television. If Tammy Cowins tells a different story, a rawer story, an affidavit-flavored story, then suddenly there are two versions of the legend, and the version with the paperwork wins the algorithm every single time. 50 Cent isn't just attacking Meech's reputation. 50 Cent is repossessing the mythology. Whoever controls the story of BMF controls the money BMF prints forever. The documentaries, the streaming deals, the merch, the tours, the legacy. That's the actual battlefield. The Instagram posts are just the noise the battlefield makes. Now zoom out even further, because there's a detail almost nobody is talking about, and the detail changes everything. When 50 Cent went to war with Rick Ross all those years ago, 50 Cent didn't try to out-rap Rick Ross. 50 Cent attacked the biography, the corrections officer past, the borrowed name, the gap between the image and the file. 50 Cent's entire doctrine is built on one principle: never fight the brand, fight the paperwork behind the brand. With Rick Ross, the paperwork was an old job. With Big Meech, the paperwork, if the whispers are even half real, is federal affidavits. Same weapon. Bigger target. And that's why the people at that podcast table went silent when the question got asked. The room understood that 50 Cent wasn't going to respond with a song. 50 Cent was going to respond with a file. And what about Meech's options? Lay the options out honestly, because none of the options are good. Option 1, silence. Let them talk, stack the money, stay legendary. But silence has a cost, because every week of silence lets the paperwork narrative harden into accepted history, and the internet does not do nuance, the internet does verdicts. Option 2, respond directly, deny everything, demand the documents get shown. But a direct response is exactly the engagement 50 Cent is fishing for, because every word Meech says becomes content for 50 Cent's next post, and 50 Cent has never once lost a war of content. Option 3. The streets handle the disrespect the old way. And option 3 is the one nobody at any podcast table wants to say out loud, because 19 years taught everybody watching exactly what the old way costs. Sit in that tension for a moment, because that tension is the whole story. A man who spent 19 years earning the right to come home, and a second man who built an empire on the first man's name, and one photograph that turned the builder into the arsonist. To understand why 50 Cent fights this way, walk through the museum of previous wars, because the pattern has been visible for 2 decades and the culture keeps acting surprised. With Ja Rule, 50 Cent didn't just win the battle. 50 Cent bought out entire rows of a Ja Rule concert so the crowd photos would show empty seats, then posted the photos. Read the psychology of that move. 50 Cent spent actual money to create an image, because 50 Cent understood before almost anybody that the internet doesn't remember songs, the internet remembers screenshots. With Rick Ross, 50 Cent took the mother of Rick Ross's child shopping, and filmed it, turning a private family into content. With the Rick Ross case, 50 Cent also surfaced the corrections officer history, the detail that permanently bent the Rick Ross mythology, because once the audience sees the file, the audience can never unsee the file. Every war, same doctrine, find the document, find the contradiction, make the contradiction famous, never raise the voice. Anger is expensive. Paperwork is cheap. 50 Cent learned that lesson before social media even had a name for it, and 50 Cent has been compounding the returns ever since. Now hold the doctrine up against the BMF situation, and the strategy snaps into focus like a lens. The BMF television series made the Flannery story a mainstream property. Streaming numbers, award chatter, a second generation of fans who know the name Meech from a screen instead of a street corner. 50 Cent executive produced that resurrection. So when the homecoming finally happened, when Meech stepped back into the free world, the value of the BMF name was at an all-time high, and a meaningful slice of that value was built on 50 Cent's dime and 50 Cent's Rolodex. Then came the homecoming concert season, the celebration circuit, the welcome home energy, and threaded through the celebration was Rick Ross. Not at the edge of the frame. In the frame. For 50 Cent, watching the investment get photographed next to the enemy wasn't disrespect. In the Curtis Jackson operating system, disrespect is too soft a word. The word in that operating system is breach. And breaches get prosecuted. Notice the sequence one more time, slowly, because the sequence is the tell. First came the silence, days of it, while the internet begged 50 Cent to react and 50 Cent gave the internet nothing. That silence wasn't hesitation. That silence was preparation. Then came the rap post, minimal, deniable, deniability being the entire point. Then came the documentary announcement, which converted a taunt into a business development. Then came the show title. Then came the steady drip of commentary, each post arriving exactly when the previous post's news cycle started to fade. That's not a man being emotional. That's a content calendar. Somebody sat down and scheduled the humiliation, and the scheduling is the part that should frighten every name in the culture, because emotion burns out, but calendars don't. Now double-click on the affidavit claim, because the affidavit claim is the engine of everything. According to the chatter 50 Cent amplified, the wiretap affidavits, the sworn documents investigators filed to justify listening to calls, allegedly contain a version of events that the public record never emphasized. Tammy Cowins, positioned inside the story for years, is the voice supposedly ready to walk the audience through those pages. Whether the documents say what the internet thinks the documents say is a question for the documentary, and for whatever lawyers get involved next. But here's the strategic reality. 50 Cent doesn't need the documents to be devastating. 50 Cent needs the audience to believe the documents might be devastating. Might is enough. Might keeps the clips circulating. Might keeps the podcasts booking panels. Might keeps Meech in the position no street legend ever wants, the position of having to either produce a denial that sounds defensive or stay quiet and look cornered. Every option costs something. 50 Cent priced the options. That's what 20 years of this buys a man. The ability to make silence expensive. And notice who else is being used in this war without consenting to be used. Charleston White made a statement. Rapper, not dealer. And 50 Cent's ecosystem picked the statement up and ran the statement through every aggregator page in hip-hop media within hours. Charleston White became a character witness in a trial Charleston White didn't know was in session. That's the modern paperwork war. Testimony crowdsourced, verdicts delivered by comment section, sentencing handled by the algorithm. The culture built this courtroom. 50 Cent just knows where the judge sits. Now go back to the table where the whole conversation started, because the table tells the audience more than the table meant to. The debate at that table was about money, Dave Blunt's money, new artist money, fantasy deal money. 200 million. The number got thrown around like confetti, and the room pushed back hard. These dudes ain't getting $200 million deals. And then came the name that ended the argument. 50 Cent is on a whole other level. Pause on what that moment reveals. In a room full of industry voices debating who's really eating, the benchmark for really eating wasn't the hottest rapper of the moment. The benchmark was a man whose biggest records are old enough to vote. Why? Because the room understands what the comment sections don't. Hits expire, but ownership compounds. 50 Cent stopped being an artist years ago in every way that matters. 50 Cent became a bank with a face, a network with a name, a portfolio that occasionally posts memes. And that transformation is exactly why the war with Meech isn't personal the way the audience thinks it's personal. Banks don't get emotional about collateral. Banks repossess. And there's one more layer to the Rick Ross photograph that almost nobody has said out loud. So let this be the place the layer gets said. When Meech stood next to Ross, the streets saw a legend linking with the biggest boss. But the industry saw something completely different. The industry saw the BMF brand. A brand with an active television franchise, a licensing tail, a documentary pipeline, getting photographed inside a rival storyline. In the boardrooms, the photograph wasn't a photo. The photograph was a rights issue. Who owns the Meech moment? Who profits when Meech trends? If Meech trends standing next to Rick Ross, the value flows one direction. If Meech trends inside a 50 Cent production, the value flows the other direction. Once the war is understood as a fight over traffic and not a fight over pride, every single move, the rat, the documentary, the show title, the timing, stops looking like chaos and starts looking like accounting. Cold, patient, itemized accounting. Here's the prediction, and the prediction is made with full confidence because the playbook is 20 years old and the playbook has never changed. The documentary drops on a day chosen for maximum pain, probably adjacent to a moment when Meech has something to celebrate, because that adjacency is a 50 Cent signature. The trailer leaks first, cut for outrage, 30 seconds of Tammy Cowins saying one sentence that gets clipped into 1,000 posts. The affidavit pages get screenshotted whether the affidavit pages are authentic or not, because by the time verification arrives, the verdict has already been rendered by the timeline. Meech faces the three options already laid out: silence, engagement, or escalation, and each option has already been priced. And 50 Cent? 50 Cent promotes a television show about catching people while the internet does the catching for 50 Cent. That's the endgame. The war isn't being fought to be won. The war is being fought to be watched, and the watching is the winning. One more thing before the verdict gets handed to the comments. because fairness is part of the job. Everything in this breakdown comes from what's publicly visible: the posts, the clips, the podcast conversations, the announced projects, the paperwork itself, the actual affidavit pages, the actual documentary footage. The public hasn't seen the paperwork. Maybe the paperwork is everything the whispers claim. Maybe the paperwork is smoke sold as fire, which would hardly be the first time a rollout confused marketing with evidence. A legend who served 19 years and came home deserves the presumption of innocence until documents say otherwise, full stop. But also full stop. A legend who came home to open doors chose the one door with a war behind the door, and choices in this culture have always cost more than intentions. Both of those truths fit in the same story, and holding both truths at once is the only honest way to watch what happens next. Because something is happening next. That much is certain. The panels keep convening. The question keeps getting asked, will 50 Cent respond? And the laughter at the tables keeps getting more nervous, because deep down everybody at every table already watched the response happen in real time, and is simply afraid to name the response. The response wasn't a post. The response was a pipeline: post, documentary, television show, podcast ecosystem, clip economy. All of the pipeline pointed at one man's name. 19 years built the legend. One photograph tested the legend. And a forward caption revealed that legends, like everything else in 2026, are only as strong as the paperwork underneath. So here's where the breakdown lands. 50 Cent and Big Meech isn't a rap beef, isn't a troll, isn't promo for a TV show. It's all three wrapped around something colder: a fight over who owns a story worth hundreds of millions of dollars. One man came home from 19 years in federal custody carrying a name the streets treated as scripture. One man spent those same 19 years turning that name into a business. The photograph with Rick Ross lit the fuse. The rap post was the first charge, and the documentary is the payload. And the question echoing through every podcast studio in America, will 50 Cent respond, turned out to be backwards. 50 Cent already responded. The response just didn't look like anything the culture was trained to recognize. Now the only question left is the one for the comments, and take the question seriously, because the culture is genuinely split down the middle. Is 50 Cent protecting an investment the way any businessman would, or is 50 Cent doing the coldest thing one man can do to another, weaponizing a man's own history the day the man finally comes home? And the second question, the one nobody wants to answer: if the paperwork is real, does the legend survive the paper? Drop the verdict below, because this debate has two sides, and both sides are loaded. Share this with somebody who still thinks the war is about a caption. And stay locked to this channel, because the day the Tammy Cowins documentary gets a release date, the second half of this war begins, and the breakdown of the second half is already loading. The rap was just the invitation. The paperwork is the party. That is not bravado. That is 20 years of receipts talking. Watch how quiet the loudest rooms get when the name comes up. The internet has a short memory for songs and a permanent memory for screenshots. Nobody at that table wanted to be the one holding the microphone when the answer arrived. Salute, family. Loud now, every single time.